The night my brother called me a deadbeat, there were 40 people in the room. Crystal glasses. Navy uniforms. Polished speeches. And my name, used like a punchline. 10 minutes later, a decorated officer walked in, stopped cold when he saw me, and saluted. That was the moment the room went silent. But to understand why that silence mattered, you need to understand how I became invisible in the first place. My name is Olivia Grant. I'm 34 years old, and for the past 8 years I've worked in classified defense systems. Not flashy. Not Instagram-worthy. Not something you can explain over mashed potatoes at Thanksgiving. But real work. The kind that keeps infrastructure from collapsing and people from dying. My family, however, prefers success they can frame. Medals. Badges. Ceremonies. If it doesn't come with applause, it doesn't count. I'm the oldest of 3. My father, Richard Grant, served 22 years in the Navy and retired with full honors. My mother, Patricia, spent 3 decades as a high school principal. Structure, discipline, and hierarchy weren't just values in our home. They were oxygen. My younger brother, Tyler, followed the script. Straight into law enforcement after high school. Broad shoulders. Clean haircut. Cruiser in the driveway. He brings his badge to Thanksgiving like it's part of the dress code. My parents glow around him. My sister, Megan, took the academic route. Debate captain. Full scholarship. Masters in international policy. Then she married a Navy officer who climbed rank fast and looked good doing it. Dress whites. Medals aligned perfectly. Command presence. My parents didn't just approve. They practically adopted him as their upgraded son. And then there's me. I studied computer engineering, skipped the Ivy League prestige circuit, and dove into cybersecurity research. I interned at obscure defense startups that didn't have PR teams. I signed so many non-disclosure agreements I stopped talking about my day altogether. I didn't walk at graduation. No ceremony. No framed photo. Just a PDF degree and a job offer tied to a federal contractor. Within 3 years, I was consulting on threat mitigation systems for state-level emergency networks. Within 5, I was flying to DC under temporary clearances to brief joint task groups. None of that made it to the family group chat. To them, I worked online. The joke started subtly. Still working from home, my dad would ask, in that tone that suggested temporary unemployment. Consulting, my mom would repeat, like it was code for freelancing without clients. I used safe language. Research. Tech defense adjacent. I couldn't say more without breaking federal law. Silence became my shield. But over time, it also became their permission. When Tyler got arrested for a DUI 2 years ago, I was the one who wired the bail before anyone else answered the phone. I also quietly covered the attorney's retainer to make sure the charge didn't derail his career. He never thanked me. 2 weeks later, he was back in uniform, telling the story like it was a minor inconvenience. When Megan's husband deployed overseas, she panicked during finals. I stayed up 3 nights straight editing her thesis while juggling my own project deadline. She graduated with distinction. Gave a speech about resilience. My name wasn't mentioned. When my mother's insurance refused coverage for a sudden surgery, I paid the $9,000 balance without blinking. She told relatives my father had figured something out financially. I didn't correct her. I told myself I wasn't doing these things for recognition. I told myself love doesn't keep receipts. But somewhere along the way, I stopped being a daughter and became a utility. Useful. Quiet. Replaceable. Tyler leaned into it hardest. He started introducing me at gatherings as our tech support. Once, at a backyard barbecue, he laughed and said, "Some of us have real jobs that require pants." The room laughed. My mother gave him that half-hearted, "Oh, Tyler," but she was smiling. I smiled too. That's what I did back then. I absorbed it. Because arguing would have required explaining, and explaining wasn't an option. The gap widened after Megan's husband, Commander Daniel Hayes, received a major promotion. Suddenly, military prestige became the household currency. Dinner conversations revolved around deployments, command structures, leadership philosophy. When it was my turn, there was polite silence. One evening, Daniel asked a single follow-up question about my work. Just one. "Are you involved in infrastructure security?" he asked carefully. I paused. "Something like that," I replied. His expression shifted slightly. Not impressed. Not dismissive. Just aware. He didn't push further. But he looked at me differently after that. That look would matter later. The moment I almost walked away for good came at Tyler's promotion party. Sergeant Strites. Big turnout. Speeches. At one point, he grabbed the microphone and thanked everyone who had his back. Our parents. His lieutenant. Megan. Not me. I had paid to clean his record. I had shielded his career. I sat there holding a plastic cup of warm wine and realized I was invisible by design. Driving home that night, I asked myself a hard question. If I disappeared tomorrow, would they notice the absence or just the inconvenience? I kept showing up anyway. Holidays. Birthdays. Random brunches I found out about last minute. I brought thoughtful gifts. Asked questions. Listened. I stayed small enough to be tolerated. And then came the dinner that changed everything. Megan and Daniel were hosting a formal celebration for his new executive officer position. Catered. Dress code. Military colleagues attending. I wasn't invited directly. I found out by accident when a caterer texted me to confirm my RSVP, confusing me with another Olivia. When I realized I wasn't on the list, I didn't ask. I didn't confront anyone. I just didn't go. Photos flooded social media that night. Uniforms. Champagne. My father giving a toast. My brother grinning in the background. I wasn't in a single frame. That should have been the end. But it wasn't. A month later came Megan's birthday banquet. Polished floors. Gold table runners. 40 guests. I received the invitation 48 hours before the event. A group text from my mother. "Hope you can make it." No warmth. No enthusiasm. Just obligation. I considered declining. I had a classified deliverable due Monday. Instead, I bought Megan a hardcover first edition she once mentioned wanting. Wrapped it in simple blue paper. Showed up 15 minutes early. I walked into a room already humming with rank and hierarchy. And I had no idea that before the night ended, everything they thought they knew about me was about to collapse. By the time dinner was served, the room had settled into its natural hierarchy. Military officers near the head table. Their spouses beside them. Close family within arm's reach of the spotlight. Extended relatives and, overflow, guests further back. I took a seat near the window, half shadowed by a tall arrangement of white lilies. It wasn't accidental. I'd gotten used to choosing the edges of rooms. You can observe more from the perimeter. You also get hit less often. My mother floated from table to table like she was hosting a fundraiser. My father stood near the bar retelling one of Daniel's deployment stories with the pride of someone who wished he'd been there himself. Tyler had already had 2 drinks and was getting louder by the minute. Megan looked immaculate. Navy blue dress. Hair pinned just enough to look effortless. She was in her element. This was her world. Structured. Applauded. Recognized. I hadn't spoken to anyone in 15 minutes when Tyler walked up behind my chair. I could smell the bourbon before he said a word. "Look who made it," he announced to the small cluster around him. The family deadbeat decided to show up. It wasn't said like a joke. It wasn't even said with heat. It was casual. Practiced. Like something he'd repeated enough times that it no longer required effort. A few people chuckled automatically. My mother gave him that same soft reprimand she'd been giving him since childhood. "Tyler." But she was smiling. My father didn't correct him. Megan kept cutting her chicken into precise squares. I felt something shift inside my chest. Not anger. Not even humiliation. Just clarity. The label had finally landed out loud. Deadbeat. After the bail wires. After the tuition edits. After the hospital bill. Deadbeat. I set my fork down carefully. "Excuse me?" I asked, calm. Tyler shrugged. "Relax. It's a joke. Some of us just have real jobs." There it was again. Real jobs. Real service. Real success. Applause-worthy careers only. I could have listed contracts. Agencies. Classified clearances. I could have mentioned the 3 all-nighters I'd just pulled finalizing a vulnerability assessment for a regional power grid. Instead, I held his gaze for 3 steady seconds and said nothing. Silence is uncomfortable when someone expects you to shrink. He shifted first. "See? No comeback," he said, trying to reclaim control. Consultants buffering. More laughter. I reached for my glass of water and took a sip. That was when the door opened. It wasn't dramatic. No spotlight. No music cue. Just the heavy banquet doors swinging inward. But conversations thinned immediately. Daniel stepped in wearing full navy dress uniform. Crisp white. Ribbons aligned perfectly. Medals catching the light. The room instinctively recalibrated around him. My father straightened. Tyler's posture shifted. Even strangers turned their bodies toward the entrance. Daniel paused just inside the doorway, scanning the room once. Then his eyes found mine. And he stopped. Not a hesitation. Not confusion. Recognition. He adjusted his stance slightly, squared his shoulders, and walked directly toward my table. Each step was deliberate but not theatrical. Conversations dimmed as he passed. I felt my pulse rise, though my expression stayed neutral. He reached the edge of the table and stood at attention. "Ma'am," he said, clear enough for half the room to hear. Then he saluted. It was not casual. Not playful. It was a textbook, formal salute. Perfect angle. Perfect stillness. You could hear silverware hit porcelain. My father's fork dropped against his plate with a sharp metallic clink. Someone near the bar whispered, "What?" Tyler's smirk evaporated. Megan froze mid-step across the room. For one suspended second, no one breathed. I held his gaze. "Lieutenant Commander," I replied evenly. My voice did not shake. He maintained the salute a fraction longer, then lowered his hand. "I didn't realize you'd be here," he said, quieter now, but still audible to those nearest. "Wasn't sure I would be," I answered. He gave a small nod, as if that confirmed something. "May I sit?" he asked. I gestured to the chair beside me. He pulled it out and took a seat without asking anyone else's permission. The temperature of the room shifted. You could feel it. Conversations resumed, but softer. Measured. Calculated. Tyler stared like someone trying to solve a math problem that no longer followed the rules he understood. My father approached slowly. "Daniel," he began, voice tight with confusion masked as politeness. "Good to see you." Daniel nodded respectfully but didn't stand. "Sir." Then he added, "You have quite the daughter." The words landed heavier than any insult ever had. My father blinked. "Well, yes." It wasn't the affirmation that stunned him. It was the tone. Daniel wasn't flattering. He was acknowledging. And everyone in that room heard it. Megan walked over moments later, composure restored but eyes sharp. "You made it," she said to him, brushing his shoulder lightly. "Wouldn't miss it," he replied. Then he glanced at me briefly before turning back to her. The glance said enough. Tyler didn't speak to me again that night. My mother avoided my table entirely. My father tried twice to restart a conversation with Daniel about leadership philosophy, but it lacked its earlier swagger. Something fundamental had cracked. For years, they had defined my worth by what they could see. By what they could introduce. By what they could boast about. Now someone from their world had publicly acknowledged mine. And he had done it without explanation. That was the most destabilizing part. He didn't tell them what I did. He didn't reveal projects. He didn't break any rules. He simply saluted. Which meant the recognition came from knowledge, not performance. I stayed through cake. Through the awkward clapping. Through the forced normalcy. Then I stood quietly, placed my napkin on the table, and left without announcing it. No dramatic exit. No confrontation. Just absence. As I stepped into the cold night air, my shoulders finally loosened. I hadn't defended myself. I hadn't revealed classified achievements. I hadn't raised my voice. And yet, for the first time in years, I had not been small in that room. The next morning, my phone buzzed. A single text from Megan. "What exactly do you do?" No greeting. No punctuation. Just that. I stared at it for a long time before locking my screen. I didn't respond. Because the real question wasn't what I did. It was why they had never cared to ask until someone else forced them to notice. And that was a much harder conversation. I didn't answer Megan's text. Not that day. Not the next. Because the question wasn't new. It had just finally been typed instead of implied. For years, they'd preferred the simplified version of me. The one that fit their narrative. The quiet daughter who worked online. The sister who was available but unimpressive. The fallback call when money was tight or documents needed editing. It had been easier for them to keep me small. And I had allowed it. That realization sat with me longer than the insult ever had. Silence isn't neutral. Silence is permission. And I had been granting it generously. The week after the banquet, my mother called twice. I let it go to voicemail. She left a message about how things got a little tense, and maybe we should all sit down and clear the air. Clear the air. Like it had been a misunderstanding. Like Tyler calling me a deadbeat was a misfire instead of a habit. Like her own words that night, "Don't make this about you," hadn't sliced clean through years of accumulated restraint. I didn't call back. Tyler didn't reach out at all. That didn't surprise me. People who build their confidence on comparison don't handle recalibration well. Megan texted again 3 days later. "Adam won't tell me everything. But I think I messed up." That was the first crack. Not defensive. Not sarcastic. Just uncertain. I still didn't answer immediately. Because something inside me had shifted, and I didn't want to rush it. For the first time in years, I wasn't orbiting them. I was steady on my own axis. Work filled the silence. A major contractor brought me in to lead a rapid vulnerability sweep tied to supply chain exposure. 2 weeks. No margin for error. I pulled 14-hour days and delivered a report that flagged 3 critical gaps. 2 were patched within 48 hours. The third forced an entire protocol rewrite. My director stopped me in the hallway afterward. "We're moving you up," he said simply. "Not because you're loud. Because you're right." That promotion came quietly. Lead systems advisor. No ceremony. No social media announcement. Just expanded authority and earned trust. And that was enough. Megan eventually called instead of texting. I let it ring once before picking up. She was quiet at first. I could hear her breathing, searching for a starting point that didn't sound rehearsed. "I should have seen it," she said finally. "Adam told me enough. Not details. Just enough." I stayed silent. "He said your name comes up in briefings. That your work keeps operations from going sideways. He said the salute wasn't symbolic. It was overdue." I closed my eyes briefly. Not from emotion. From confirmation. "I didn't know what to do with that," she continued. "It's easier to believe someone is drifting than to admit you never asked where they were headed." That landed. Not because it erased the past. But because it acknowledged it without excuses. "I'm not angry," I told her calmly. "But I'm not available for the old dynamic anymore." She didn't argue. "Tell me what that means." So I did. No more jokes at my expense. No silence when someone minimizes me. No rewriting history to make discomfort disappear. If we were going to have a relationship, it had to exist in reality. She agreed. No bargaining. No defensiveness. Just agreement. It wasn't a cinematic reconciliation. There were no tears. But it was honest. And honest was new. I didn't rush back to family dinners. I didn't flood the group chat. I let space do its work. Meanwhile, my life expanded. I accepted a long-term position that required relocation. New city. New office. No one there knew the family version of me. Only the professional one. I built mentorship hours into my Fridays. Younger analysts booked them regularly. I saw in them what I used to suppress in myself. Competence without performance. Capability without applause. One afternoon, a junior team member asked if I'd ever felt underestimated. I gave her the simplest truth. "I used to confuse being quiet with being invisible," I said. "They're not the same." That lesson cost me years. I passed it on freely. Months later, I heard from a cousin that Daniel had spoken up at another family gathering when Tyler made a sideways comment about me. Apparently, Daniel simply asked, "Do you actually know what she does?" The room had gone quiet again. I didn't feel vindicated hearing that. I felt neutral. The math was balancing on its own. My parents saw me once more unexpectedly. I was speaking at a closed panel in D.C., discussing systemic risk modeling. They stood in the back. They didn't interrupt. They didn't leave early. Afterward, my father approached carefully. "You looked like you belonged up there," he said. Not pride. Not apology. Recognition. "I do," I replied. He nodded once. "We didn't know." I met his eyes. "You didn't ask." It wasn't cruel. It was factual. And for the first time, he didn't deflect it. Tyler never apologized. And that's fine. Not every chapter requires resolution. Some people don't change. They just get quieter when their narrative loses traction. Megan and I speak occasionally now. Carefully. Respectfully. She stopped using the word dramatic. She stopped laughing at jokes that cost me dignity. She volunteers with a nonprofit helping military spouses transition into civilian careers. She told me it made her realize how much invisible labor exists in structured systems. "Sound familiar?" she said once, half smiling. "A little," I answered. I keep her handwritten apology in a drawer. Not framed. Not displayed. Just there. A reminder that growth is possible, but boundaries are permanent. Adam and I exchange professional emails occasionally. Once, I thanked him for that night. He replied, "Wasn't doing you a favor. Just correcting the room." That's what it was. A correction. Not revenge. Not exposure. Correction. And that's what changed everything. Not the rank. Not the uniform. Not even the word, "ma'am." It was the pause that followed. The silence where their assumptions used to sit comfortably. The moment their story about me stopped working. These days, my life is quiet. Not small. Quiet by design. I don't chase recognition. I don't shrink to preserve comfort. I don't explain myself to people who prefer simplified versions of me. I build systems. I mentor talent. I protect structures most people will never see. And I do it without apology. Because legacy isn't what your family understands about you. It's what stands because of you. So if you've ever been underestimated, if you've ever sat at a table where your contributions were erased because they didn't fit someone else's definition of success, I want you to remember something. You don't need to perform your worth for the people committed to misunderstanding you. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is step back and let reality speak. And sometimes, reality walks into the room in uniform, stands at attention, and says one word. "Ma'am." If this story resonated with you, drop your experience in the comments. Have you ever had to walk away to protect your peace? Or had someone finally recognize your value when others refused to see it? I read every comment. And if you believe quiet strength deserves a spotlight too, hit like, share this with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more real stories about boundaries, respect, and the kind of justice that doesn't shout. Sometimes the loudest moment in your life is the silence that follows the truth.